Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at the Roadmaster InvisiBrake braking system on a 2012 Honda CRV. So here's the module of the InvisiBrake actually in the vehicle. It tucks underneath the seat, nice and clean, and you do have a cylinder there as well. And what this does is it has a cable attached to the front of the vehicle, and if the vehicle becomes not attached to your tow vehicle, then the brakes will kick on the towed vehicle, and that way it'll come to a stop rather than rolling. Now this is required on all flat tow vehicles, and it'll keep you safe and legal. Another great feature of the InvisiBrake is the fact that it is proportional, meaning it'll allow a slight proportioning, not just all or none braking on the CRV. So that way, when I'm slowing down in my tow vehicle, this will slow down as well, allowing this to kind of slow down rather than pushing against this, helping you stop nice and easy and keeping the ride a lot smoother as well. Your breakaway switch is right here, and it is attached to your base plate via a self-tapping screw. And the way that it works is if the vehicle does become not attached to the tow vehicle, this will pull out and will actuate the cylinder, pulling the cable on the brakes, bringing the vehicle to a stop. Now I'm in our tow vehicle, and included in the kit is this nice little light here, which will illuminate when the brakes on your towed vehicle are actually applied. So that's a good reminder to let you know that the system is working properly. Also, when the brakes are applied, you can see it working in the vehicle. My lights are on, and I know everything's working. Flat towing a vehicle is quite a complicated install. I was kind of in every aspect of the vehicle while doing it, but it was my first time doing a flat tow install on my own. So if I can do it, so can you, and I'm gonna walk you through each step, and that way you're comfortable knowing what you're getting into. The first main component is the actual box itself, and this is gonna control the braking and have pneumatics as well as electronics feeding into it. So I mounted it under the driver's seat, and I made sure that my clearances were good and it works well there. Now I used hook and loop, and that kind of keeps it in place without having to run self-tappers through. If you want to choose to mount it that way, you can also do that. Just be careful where you're drilling down to. Peeling back the insulation where the box was sitting, you're going to see I mounted our cylinder here. Now there's a bunch of different ways that you can mount it. I found that this keeps it out of the way, close to the box, and also our cables are able to run pretty easily. So the cable from the cylinder I'm running alongside here, and once we have our plastic back in place, that's going to hide the cable. Now you want to make sure that there's no bends or any that are too tight, or it's going to kink the cable, and I found that this works pretty well. So pulling the carpet up here, you can see where we actually ran it. Kind of runs this way, and then we have our bracket here which holds it in place. So moving up from our bracket, you're going to see I mounted the pulley here with some self-tappers, and then we have our bracket. Now I did trim the bracket so it's nice and clear. Now I haven't tightened it down, but this seems to put it at a good angle with our cable, and it shouldn't have any binding issues. Our last main component is going to be the breakaway switch. Now I mounted this to our base plate with a self-tapping screw, and it should hold in place just fine. Now that we've seen the main components, I want to show you how I actually routed the wiring and the connection lines between all of those components. So off of our box, you're going to have two electrical plugs and two hoses that are going to attach here. So here you actually have your braking signals that are going to feed to the box, and these are going to be your power. Now these will need to run up to the engine bay. So along with these two power plugs, there's also a pneumatic hose here, and it uses a sleeve to attach to that. And this is actually going to take the air from the brake booster to actually stop the vehicle. So this will also have to go to the engine bay. So these all three will route through a grommet, and we'll run that up to the by the firewall and up into the engine bay. Now this tiny little hose here simply goes to a push connect fitting to our cylinder itself, and that's going to control the cylinder and the actuation of the cable. Now there's several methods to run wiring and your hose up to the front of the car, and you can run it in the interior and find a grommet in the actual firewall and do it that way. But I found with this grommet here, I can run a direct route down the vehicle, down to the bottom of the vehicle, and run it up. So it's easier for me. I do have a lift but if your car is jacked up, it shouldn't be too hard, and it does make it, I think, a little bit easier than running through a dashboard area. So you can see where I have some black silicone, and I've done that just to protect any water or moisture getting in our grommet. But I use a knife to make 2 tiny slits to run our wires through. Now you can see my pneumatic line goes back. It's not necessary to do that, but I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to kink, so I really looped it, and that way it's not binding up. Now the rest of them you can see here. I will recommend that if you can get them all fed through here, bundling them up, whether it be with electrical tape or zip ties, and that way you can run it as one big wire. It's going to make it a lot easier so you don't have to repeat the step a bunch with the same wires. So as you can see, it's going to come out here, and I'm trying my best to stay away from any moving parts like the drive shaft or any suspension or brakes or exhaust, anything that can cause damage to it. So trying to route along with factory lines is ideal because those are protected. So you can see I kind of channeled them in following the actual little baskets here, and then it's going to go up. Now you can see the steering box here. This is a moving point, so really try to make sure that you don't make contact or it's resting there. So I've tried my best to push these out of the way, and I used a fish wire that I fed down here and pulled the wires up. I routed my Airline a little bit different because I wanted to tuck it back by the brake booster up top, so they do kind of take a slightly different path, and therefore I kind of bowed it out here. So we'll see that when we get to the engine bay. So I did my best job to try to make this look OEM and hidden because it is a lot of wires and it's a lot of colors, and it can kind of look not so great. So you can see it running up here. It kind of goes on the outside of the air box, and then I looped it back behind this fuse panel, so it tucks underneath there, and I took some of the brackets out, and that way I could run it underneath. So you can see them down there. And then moving from there, we do have our power splits off to our battery. We also have our fuse holder on the positive, and then our other cables, well, there's a ground as well, I should mention, but I ran them underneath when the front fascia was off. In order to get signal for our brake system, we did have to tie into the diode wiring. Now it's pretty simple, and we did have to splice off of it and run it to the front pin, but this is where I made my butt connections. Now I have it wrapped up with tape, but I have heat shrink butt connectors, and simply crimp those down, and with a heat gun, those will create a watertight seal. I did put electrical tape just to kind of hold that bundle together. So what's going on underneath that tape is going to be the wires from the diode wiring is going to be the 4-colored. You also have the 4-colored wires from the braking system itself. So what I did is I spliced the ends here, and I actually connected the same colors to each other. And so those two go into one side of the butt connector, and then the other side of the butt connector will have one wire, and that's going to attach to the wire running to our connector up front. And those wires that we butt connected will feed up to our plug here, and this is part of our diode wiring connection. Now, part of the other component is going to be obviously the pneumatics, and this is our line that is fed from underneath the car. It's kind of hard to see, but there is a supplied T that I used to splice into the factory brake booster line. There's also a one-way check valve, and this is actually the factory one that came on the CRV. I added another one in the kit just as a double protection, as it's not going to hurt anything. So make your splice there, put your T in, and connect it up, and make sure that your one-ways are facing the correct way, and you should be good. In our braking system kit, you're going to find a wire, and this is going to attach to the signal that sends the brake light. Now, this is going to be tied into the factory wire, and that way we know when it sends signal. From there, we run this wire to the front by the plug, and that way we can have an indicator light in the towing vehicle to know if the brakes are engaged or not. You can see the blue wire coming off of this connector. The blue wire is what is sending the signal, and I found this by using a light indicator and hitting the brake lights and seeing it light up. So I knew it was my right wire, and I used the quick splice to connect those. Now, if you don't have a quick splice, because this isn't included in the kit, you can get those here at eTrailer, and it's going to make it nice and easy. I then routed our wire through a factory grommet and down underneath the vehicle. I then followed this wire with the other wires that I ran to the engine bay, and then eventually to our plug. Here's the other end, And so this is going to connect to a jumper, which will then go to our towing vehicle, which will then feed to a light, and that's going to indicate when the brakes are being applied to your towed vehicle. The last step that we have is to run our signal light to the dash on our motorhome. So this will connect to the towed vehicle, and we simply ran this underneath the vehicle, following the same kind of rules as running wire under a car, making sure to avoid anything hot, moving, or anywhere where it can pinch or get damaged. So we traced this kind of down the middle, and I ended up poking it up through our floorboard where we'll see it in the dash installed. So here you can see the indicator light installed, and so I used one of the panels here on the dash, pop that out. So when the braking system is activated on the vehicle, this will let you know that the brakes are actually working on the vehicle, because otherwise if you're towing, you really don't know if those brakes are working or not. So this is a great way to make sure that you stay safe and that it's actually working for you. And that was a look at the Roadmaster InvisiBrake on 2012 Honda CRV.